We flew from Philadelphia to Melbourne to film cool cars that we don't get in the United States. But behind and in front of each of those cars was a camera car. A 1986 Ford Falcon XF wagon in hot yellow with the 4.1-liter carbureted six-cylinder, making a variable amount of horsepower and torque. The numbers are contradictory, so when I say how much power this wagon makes, sometimes it's a different number. Approximately 140 horsepower and 230 pound-feet of torque. This wagon was RCR Australia's workhorse, unceremoniously transporting us all around the Melbourne area. And behind the wheel was Matto, our fixer. Without Matto, we would have been lost kittens running into parked cars because the streets in Melbourne are 2 lanes in the same direction at some points of the day, and then later, that same section of street has parked cars in it in the left lane. What the hell, Melbourne? Where do these parked cars come from? Anyway, Matto knows Victoria well and drives a truck on the Melbourne to Sydney run. But back in the 1980s, this was Australia's long-haul family machine. And through my American eyes, this car looks like it's from the early 1990s, not the mid-80s, because of these molded headlights. Most of America was still using glass-sealed beams in the 1980s because tradition.
When I was in the Navy, we communicated with Morse code and fueled the minesweeper with ethnic slurs. My name is Marty Kimmel, and the algorithm will never get me. I'm too smart. Now I will fill the rest of our meal at Shady Maple by reciting news I got on Facebook News. I had sex with a man on the USS Coral Sea. My name is Marty Kimmel.
Carburation. No power steering, brittle plastic interior, rear door handles that face the opposite ergonomic direction, and this was one of the more challenging cars I've had to drive in my life. Number 1, because Melbourne is weird, and number 2, I have a 3-speed automatic, and number 2 doesn't work. I got first gear and third. Awesome. So I get rip-roaring power, and then it doesn't shift, and then it doesn't shift, and then bleh. Well, I mean, once I'm at speed, this wagon feels great. And once I'm on the mountain roads, it feels fantastic too. And this is why we need to go to Australia again, because this looks, if this was an American wagon, it would just be plowing around corners. It wouldn't want to corner at all. But this almost unmodified XF Falcon will corner. It's like a touring car from an American perspective. I'm like, oh, this is hanging on. How is it doing this? Well, the Falcon wagon was expected to do much more than your standard, I guess, Chevy Caprice from the 80s. Or maybe Ford LTD Country Squire wagon, right? Or your family truckster, which made fun of wagons in the United States in the late 70s, and it was still funny in the early 80s. But this XF wagon is expected to go long distance and be comfortable. It's also expected to haul loads. It's expected to be fast-ish, reliable, and be able to handle multiple driving environments using only rear-wheel drive. So how do you really do that? Well, make stiff suspension, but give it more ride height. And you think that would have been terrible, but Ford of Australia figured it out. The closest thing this resembles, this car honestly drives like a Subaru Forester, minus the all-wheel drive. That's how advanced Ford of Australia really was. Now, does this have fuel injection? No. Was it offered? Yes, kind of. So while this is a nice futuristic looking dash in here, when you step on the gas, it's still a 2-barrel carburetor. 2-barrel carburetors act like an on and off switch. You're either on power or you're not. But it's not like a motorcycle that's like, ooh, it's either on power or not. It's either, yes, we are accelerating, or no, we are not. Think like an old Jag. But in spite of this sort of yes or no acceleration, Australia loved the XF wagon for the same reason that kids love Cinnamon Toast Crunch. It's a part of their identity. I mean, Golden Grams is a tight contender, but I will admit that Golden Grams only gives you a window of about 90 seconds before it succumbs to the milk. But no matter which one you choose, you're starting your day with a sugary mixture of rice and wheat squares, and it's part of the childhood experience. Just like this futon on four wheels is part of the Australian national character. So much so it also won the Australia Design Award. Seeing these on the road down under is as common an experience as rejection, because even the hottest person you can think of has heard the word no at least once. One argument for why this is the case is that the Falcon represents in Australia what the Ford Taurus used to represent in the US. The Taurus was one of the best-selling cars in America in the 1990s, if not the best-selling. And it hit its peak at a time when the economy was strong. We had some technology, but it wasn't invasive, and the automotive industry wasn't filled with as many idiots making short-sighted, trend-chasing decisions. You could still drive a good car without mortgaging your financial future. Hell, you couldn't swing a corded boombox without hitting an affordable car. They were everywhere. And they were good. And even the ones that weren't had loads of personality. The Mercury Topaz was a dog, but it felt like a car someone cared about making. It felt as if there was some consideration to what it would be. Not just what it would do for the driver pragmatically, but what it would do for them at a deeper level. Now it just feels like all thought is being outsourced to a system of capitalist buzzwords. And look, I know the almighty dollar has always been the point. No one does anything for the love of the game except online trolls and Lexus with the LFA. But the Falcon is a throwback to the days of Ford and Holden waging war on Aussie roads for the right to be the everyman's choice, to be that practical, reliable symbol of honest effort. It's the guy you don't really want to be with anymore, but you stick around because he's a great dad. He hasn't really done anything wrong. He's just not that great at being a romantic partner. The Falcon seems like a bog-standard wagon, but it plays by different rules. You're not getting it because it's a good car. You're getting it for the same reason you get a Corolla. You want to know what it's like to have something in your life that lasts. The XF is part of the fourth generation in Australia, which included the XD, XE, and XF models that are largely distinguished by their front fascia. The XF sedans and station wagons were only sold from 1984 to 1988, and were the result of Ford Australia's goal of dropping the XE in favor of a smaller car that would utilize the Mazda 626 or Ford Telstar platform. But when the XD proved competitive with the Holden Commodore, the decision was made to produce a new iteration of the Falcon, with the fourth generation as a stopgap until the fifth generation could be produced, as Ford of Australia now knew where their bread was being buttered. The result was a Falcon that was even more successful than the XD, as the XF sold over 250,000 cars, making it Ford Australia's most successful Falcon ever. And what's interesting is that, for all that backstory, it's still not very flashy. In fact, it would seem wrong if it didn't look beat up and run down by the elements, just a plain-looking wagon. Because these were cars that were built to be manhandled like a couch through a narrow doorway. The engine is an evolution of the old Thrift Power 6 that we in the United States had and continued using in the 80s. But Ford of America, did we ever embrace a cross-flow head with our six-cylinder Falcon engines? No. Reverse throw head deep into the 80s. So while you had this with your aluminum head, your cross-flow, and the fuel injections on its way, the Ford LTD in the 80s, nope. Same engine, the same 200 cubic inch that was used in the second-gen Falcon in the late 60s. Ugh. I mean, they didn't always have the alloy head or aluminum head. They had iron heads, but aluminum alloy was lighter, so it helped improve performance on a car that really wasn't all that dynamic in the first place. And that's why Ford of Australia is better than Ford of America, because they're like, okay, how can we continue improving this engine? Well, let's do the thing that improves the engine, rather than Ford that says, is this a truck? No. Well, we don't care. You should be glad it has an engine at all. Oh, are you complaining about a six-cylinder? Do you want a 4? We can give you a 4. Oh, you're not buying the F-150? Well, you're not worth my time. Get out of the dealership. Anyway. Now, these came with a Stromberg carburetor before they were upgraded to double Webers. You had the option of Bosch fuel injection, as there was not really EFI variants of this engine. Matto tells us that the Weber increased power to 141 horsepower and 233 pound-feet of torque, and this is matched to a 3-speed Borg-Warner Type 53, where first gear is 2.39 to 1, second, which doesn't exist in this car, is 1.45 to 1, and third gear, 1 to 1. So just like Americans in the 1980s, Australians also had automatic transmissions that did not have overdrive. Fantastic. But when I'm on these back roads, the difference between the Australian engines and the American engines is that the Australian engines are way more elastic. They don't mind lugging and they don't mind revving. They'll do everything. And when turbos started appearing, why can't we have nice things in the U.S.? Anyway, but ultimately, this isn't a car you're meant to applaud for its performance so much as admire it for its resilience. And while we were driving around with this car around Melbourne, we would see thumbs ups. And we would see people staring at us because people remember this car from their youth. Seeing one of these is like seeing a Taurus wagon from the early 90s, or maybe a Gen 1 Dodge Caravan. So yeah, the steering wheel is aftermarket. The original one was big and thin and kind of felt weird. This feels nice. And it also has chrome wheel trim rings because we're in Mad Max territory now. Matto wants to do a barrel swap and put a 5-speed manual in, so he's refraining from any other major modifications, which is why this is staying this way for the foreseeable future. And you would probably think that that would be a good thing because it's money in hand. You're not shelling out for expensive upgrades. And outside of regular maintenance, it's shown that it's capable of surviving, even if it's going to complain about having to continue living. See also the missing second gear. It's what's familiar. It straddles the line between Friday night and Monday morning. It feels like a weekend and a workday at the same time. That's the energy you're getting with a Falcon XF wagon. Ford Falcon. The official car of a dive bar's dive bar. The kind of place where you offer to buy the whole bar around and you're only on the hook for 3 beers. But one of the other issues with this car is a matter of fuel economy. In Matto's experience, he gets approximately 32 liters per 100 kilometers. 32 liters per 100 kilometers. Someone in the comments figure it out. I am just too lazy to do that. Of course, there also is an unresolved fuel leak somewhere. So holding off on expensive upgrades isn't really saving money, but then it's still a net positive for Matto. He used to drive an 08 Falcon, but it was wearing out, and at the time when he owned it, Australia was seeing a surge in LPG, which is for Americans, that is liquid petroleum gas conversions with factory LPG systems. But the LPG infrastructure in Australia was gradually being phased out when fueling stations couldn't afford it. So Matto needed something that just ran straight petrol and looked cool and was unique. And while cool is subjective and unique suggests rarity, this is honestly both to these American eyes. For one, the previous owner of this wagon was an old Italian man who must have smoked 5 packs a day from how bad this thing stank when Matto got it. And it still has that occasional mechanic on smoke break smell. When he got it, Matto had to clean out cigarette butts and ash from the interior, and he was still finding old butts up to the time we filmed this. The interior also looks its age. Honestly, I think it looks okay, but not necessarily from wear, but by design. The 4th Gen Falcon is said to be on the more spacious side of things. It certainly felt that way driving it. Visibility is excellent. But it still feels kind of cramped in the back, and it has a low ceiling and a high luggage floor in the back. So it really can't quite carry all the luggage you think it can. But maybe the high floor in the back is because they needed the taller suspension because you're expected to drive on dirt and gravel roads with this thing, and the thing can't brake. And an old car like this can start to feel like home. And it started to feel like home base for us. Because most of what I saw in Australia, I saw through the windows of this car. I became accustomed to the seats and the worn down, lived in feel of the interior, and having to get in through only one side, Lebowski style, because you can't open it from the other side outside. And Ford of Australia never offered options, really. This was just a reliable wagon, and that was enough to sell. The XF Falcon worked its ass off, but it also has this air of hard-won leisure. Like after the long film shoots, I sink into these seats and the workday is done. And now I can just think about the pub or another breakfast because, oh man, do Australians do breakfast? Oh, flat whites. Give me flat whites and steak for breakfast. Come on, man. That rules. 2 flat whites. It's a reliable workhorse that you can have fun with because you can beat on it, and this is just going to keep running. And maybe that's why the Australians love the Falcon, because it's a microcosm of the country at large. Resilient, but casual, sarcastic and colorful, hardworking and laid back, foul-mouthed and kind, and all the other adjectives that go along with a car that can struggle through the worst of times, but remind you that there can be something meaningful in that struggle and something way better on the other side of it. Thank you, Australia. I'm coming back. So blow your mind in the United States, no paying. Everybody's honest.
I mean, prepay is optional, but you don't even just pick the thing up. They'll do the button up in the control booth. And
oh, they have to hit the button inside.
Yeah,
okay, it's not that. Okay.
And sometimes, like, it'll be a time of night where it hasn't gone into the point where you have to prepay, but there'll be hardly anyone there, so the clerk, the store manager's just doing some stock counting, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Then you'll be waiting for like 15-20 seconds.
There's no button on here that makes a ding ding inside?
No.
Oh. There's no help button either.
You pull you just pull that off, and then that tells their computer that someone wants to put fuel in their car.
Okay. Interesting. You go to some pumps in the US and they'll have a button on here that will call the attendant, like an intercom.
No, not a thing here.
But once I'm in the sweeping corners, this is starting to work. This wagon, it does stuff that American big wagons can't do. It finds a corner, it finds an angle, and it just hangs on.
Which is weird for something that's got archaic as all hell.
Yeah.
Like standard for the time, but guess what? The wagon that I had, the last of the station wagons before they stopped making them, still had leaf spring and solid axle.
Yeah.
They just didn't change the formula.
Yeah.
And it's same thing.
Yeah.
Just it will find an angle and carry through.
Yeah, in the 80s, this would have been a Ford LTD wagon, which would be boaty as hell, no feel to it at all.
Yeah.
Is that a park ranger?
Nah, that's
Okay, do I need the turn signal?
nah, not really. I mean, apparently it is a law, but for whatever reason, Victorians don't follow it, and it's just, I don't know, everybody knows where you're going. That we just treat roundabouts as regular turns.